My name is Joël Denis, and I will be opening up the session today. Welcome, Right Honorable members and participants of the conference. We're here today for the Strengthening Pandemic and Preparedness and Response, Lessons Learned from Ebola and COVID-19. I'd like to first thank not only all of you for being here and participating today, but also the collaboration and partners that we have that make today's presentation possible. And you'll hear from some of these today through our roundtable discussion. As you know, COVID-19 has shown the importance of international collaboration in tackling the global health threats, and many of the sessions that are going on today and through the other days of the summit are echoing these, as did the opening ceremony last night. However, these are not just related to COVID-19. There are other public health threats that allow us to gain some additional lessons learned as far as we think is preparedness in the future. And other diseases such as Ebola are a striking reminder that it's not just COVID-19 that we need to prepare ourselves against. The aim of the session today is to talk about these lessons learned, and we're going to do it in a dynamic format where we'll have a host who will ask a series of questions to the panel members to get pull from their experiences to shed some light on these lessons learned and how it might inform future preparedness. Before I switch to the introductions to get us going, I've been asked to say a few remarks just to kick off and position the actual presentation itself. I'll start with a quote that you may have heard from George Santayana, that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. As we heard from the session last night, there's a window of opportunity before us where we can take advantage from what we've learned through the pandemic and build a stronger pandemic preparedness and readiness and response system moving forward. But this isn't easy. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn, as we'll hear today, and how we distill those learnings, how we prioritize them, how we organize ourselves to deliver them, coordinate, and fund them is not as easy as it sounds. From my perspective, I'll throw out a couple of notions that the speakers may want to pick up on through their remarks. One, I worry about two counterforces as far as they may play out in the planning and preparedness. One is amnesia, and the other is fatigue. Amnesia, you've all seen the graphs historically over time of the peaks and valleys of different pandemic responses in both funding and attention. Funding goes up, and then funding and attention goes down, and then pandemics reoccur, and on we go. So how do we make sure that we don't forget post this pandemic as we look to preparedness in the future? And in terms of fatigue, obviously there's fatigue from healthcare providers and those that are on the front line. There may be even fatigue from the perspective of analysis and paralysis from the extent of the lessons learned and what do we do with them. And certainly fatigue perhaps from the public that transitions to other things, whether it's war, inflation, food security, and other key issues. So how do we ensure that we actually keep the lessons learned front and center as we think about preparedness in the future? These were reminded about last night and the theme of the conference, taking a global health to the next level, and that's exactly what we're here to talk about today in the session. In terms of learning from pandemics, we know what needs to be done. The various the sessions from this conference highlight all the different components: need for shared vision, renewed infrastructure, need for new funding, life-saving countermeasures, acknowledging the interconnection between human, animal, and crops, and the shared environment in which they operate, and the One Health approach, and across it all, a focus on equity in those who need the attention the most. But as we look forward to the conversation today, I will put forward a couple of thoughts so that we don't succumb to this amnesia and this fatigue, and suggest that amidst the scope before us, that we be as specific as possible, and would encourage the panelists, as we talk about lessons learned, to move from generalities to actual concrete points that we can make as we work towards preparedness. This is hard to do as we have great ambitions. We see a lot of things that we've learned from the COVID pandemic that we want to address and we want to fix. The solutions need to be practical, they need to resonate with the public, and they need to be implementable. And here we see a key role for evidence and data and research that clears the brush in front of us so that it reminds us of the opportunities and challenges that we may proceed. Also in terms of prioritization, pushing for Can you hear me okay? In terms of prioritization, again, we need an ambitious agenda, but we need to be clear what's first among equals in terms of issues and both in terms of process. And as we undertake the necessary work moving forward, it's helpful to look at specific global health issues that can factor into the pandemic preparedness. And here I'd suggest one in particular, though I invite the speakers to identify concrete ones as well, around antimicrobial resistance, the next global threat that some call the silent pandemic, and others would argue is not so silent anymore. Many of the elements of pandemic preparedness response are the same for AMR, whether it's surveillance, early detection, risk assessments and response, also having the therapeutics and life-saving medication that's required and that the public expects. Infection prevention as well cuts across all of these areas. For these reasons, we think that AMR is not only worth our attention in its own right, but can serve as a concrete issue to bring to life some of the structures and financing mechanisms that are being talked about. With that, I'll start with some introductions. Dr. John Dusabe Richards will be the chief moderator for the session today. Dr. Richards is the director of the Global Health Division at the International Development Research Center in Canada, where he heads up the funding for low, middle, and income countries. Before IDRC, John was a policy lead at the Population Health at the UK government's Department of Health and Social Care. We also have Minister Wilhelmina Jala. Thank you for joining us, Minister. Minister Jala is the Minister of the Health of the Republic of Liberia. She's a medical doctor with over 25 years of national and international work experience in the clinical services and public health management. She's also the chair of the country's incident management response system and is responsible for the implementation of the country's national COVID-19 pandemic preparedness and response. We also have Dr. Sumia Swaminathan, thank you for joining us, who was appointed as WHO's first chief scientist in March of 2019. She's a pediatrician and a globally recognized researcher on tuberculosis and HIV with over 30 years of experience in clinical care and research. Her vision is to ensure that the WHO is at the cutting edge of science and is able to translate new knowledge into meaningful impact on population and health worldwide. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Misaki Winjira, the chief scientist from the Ministry of Uganda, who's sitting in for the Minister Jane Ruth Achero. Thank you for joining us. We also have, to my left, Dr. Roxana Daragia, who is the global head of the Global Public Health Research and Development at Johnson & Johnson, working with her team to leverage discovery, development, and regulatory capabilities. Dr. Dragia is a medical doctor with a doctorate in human genetics, and her wide range of expertise includes impactful work on industry, government, and academia. Last but not least, we have Professor and Dr. Gary Kobinger. Welcome, Doctor. He's the director of the Galveston National Laboratory at the University of Texas Medical Branch, which is one of the largest active biocontainment facilities on an academic campus. His research presently focuses on developing and testing new vaccine platforms and immune treatments against pathogens and high consequences to address global health threats. And with that, I'll pass it over to John. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Joel Denis is a Director General of Antimicrobial Resistance Task Force in the Canadian Public Health Agency. So thank you, Joel. And I would like to add my thanks to the distinguished panelists. Thank you. And thank you for coming to this session, everyone. I can see that it's popular and people are waiting outside. So we will try to meet your expectations. I will, this is a conversation with these distinguished panelists, but we will also have an opportunity to welcome you, the audience, including those online, to come in and ask questions. But while we're discussing today, we are actually having an ongoing Ebola outbreak in Uganda. So I'm very, very happy, and we're very, very privileged to have the chief scientist joining us today as the outbreak is ongoing. I think there will be numbers, but I don't know the update at the moment, but on 20th September this year, the Uganda government declared the first confirmed case of Ebola, of Sudan virus disease. And as of 12th October last week, there had been 54 cases and 19 deaths. Some of these were healthcare workers. So it is a momentous opportunity to be having this panel discussing the experiences from Ebola and COVID-19. And if I can come to you, Doctor, in your observations at the moment, with the current outbreak particularly, what are your observations that you're making that could relate to previous Ebola outbreaks in Uganda and other countries? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning. First of all, we are so happy to, having been invited to be part of this panel, largely because this is an important part of what is happening in Uganda. Uganda has experienced 7 Ebola outbreaks in the last 22 years. Of course, the current one being the 7th. Until I think the West African outbreak of 2013 to 2016, the 2000 and 2001 outbreak of Ebola virus disease in Uganda, in the districts of Gulu and Masindi represented the biggest outbreak with 580 cases and I think 254 deaths reported. Of course, the West African outbreak subsequently surpassed that. Between 2017, 2012, Uganda's had about 5 pockets of Ebola outbreaks, repeatedly, effectively contained locally. And the current EVD outbreak clearly speaks about a different environment we are operating in. Uganda is more socio-economically and politically secured country with increased urbanization and increased movements of people. And so the picture that we are seeing presents a series of challenges, both for us as the country, but also for the region. And probably we need to think about how to address some of the challenges that come with this. And I'll come back to this. But to start with, of course, it's Uganda has been able to stand all these, the many epidemics, largely on premise of about, I would cluster three pillars. The first core pillar for the Ugandan response has been really majorly centered on political leadership. Every time we have an outbreak, the political leadership of the country comes out clearly and, of course, takes leadership for the response. And that, in a sense, provides, makes it easy for many things to work from the perspective of not just the Ministry of Health, but also from the perspective of other components of the response that briefly I'll talk about. Of course, the second thing to look at is the coordinated nature, the ability to coordinate the existing health system infrastructure that is in place through the EOC and the National Task Force. That is very key. One of the things we are happy about is the previous investments by partners like Gavi, as well as the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria in terms of building capacity in health systems. Tell you about the laboratory networks that we've been able, the sample transportation systems, which literally enable us to do a lot of early detection of the pathogens whenever we have an outbreak. Of course, the community awareness is very strong arm. I'll tell you that in the context of the current outbreak, the alarm came from the index case, indicating to the health workers in Mubende Regional Referral that even though he was the first person to come to the hospital, there had been related deaths in the community whose description matched the case definition. So we, in the context of the numbers we have in the background about 19 probable deaths that had happened in the epicenter. And of course, this tells you that the community is always sensitive, and community initially acts as the indicator that there is a problem in the community. And then, of course, the accurate risk communication and community engagement is very key in terms of responding to the pandemics. Historically, of course, we found that other, health systems like the cold chain systems that are built by Gavi and UNEP for immunization have helped us respond effectively in terms of deploying vaccines. But this tells you that this is not it's been built over time, and it has challenges. And perhaps one of the things I will speak about are the challenges that we are experiencing in the current epidemic is, first of all, we have an infodemic issue, a lot of information sources available on, and this affects our risk communication. The second thing to look at is, of course, the quick travel, the fact that we are more urbanized. So we've had 3 suspected cases who are contacts. Actually, these contacts were already following them up from Mubende, but for some reason they found their way to regional referrals in Kampala.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Wangera. Absolutely. I think this is an absolutely fantastic opportunity to be discussing this. And over to your left, we have Minister Jala from Liberia. Now, and what you described is indeed issues and problems we see quite a lot when an outbreak starts. And with Ebola, you have a fantastic experience, I think, managing it that has been celebrated because of your health system. And in Liberia, in 2010s, we had obviously a big outbreak there, Minister, and your government successfully managed to contain this outbreak. And over to you, then. I would like to hear some your views around what Dr. Wanyengera mentioned, but also your experience managing that outbreak, And if any tools and observations from that outbreak are still being used today to manage infections and to, for example, being applied to COVID-19. Minister Jala.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for coming to just share our experience and answer some of the questions. After the Ebola situation, a lot of, even though it was a bad situation, but a lot of good things came out of that situation. Right after that, our National Public Health Institute was established. We began to train epidemiologists, or from field epidemiologists all the way up to intermediate and advanced epidemiologists. The triages were being built by partners, isolation center were being built, EOC was set up, there was a specimen transfer system in place, and the community structures were all in place from the chief to the different levels in the different communities. The survivors from the Ebola were being taken care of. So we knew that there would be survivors from whatever happened. But as the COVID-19 began, when the news hit, the first thing we had to do was manage the negative news, because everybody got afraid. They thought it was Ebola was back. So how do you reach out to the community to make sure that you explain it's not Ebola? We do not know everything about this disease, but one thing we know is not Ebola. So, you all calm down and let's keep finding out what's going on. But in the meantime, IPC is important. Wash your hands, wear your mask and social distance, because that's what was going around the country. So right in February of 2020, first thing we did was we woke up all of those structures. Some of them were dead, so we had to get the list of all those who were initially working through the Ebola situation, all of our pillows. We had our first meeting, even though the disease was not there yet. We mobilized everyone, we established coordination, and we began to prepare. So we set up a system where anyone who were coming from those high-risk areas, we will isolate them. That is a very expensive venture, because people come in, you have to keep them for 7 days, or monitoring them, feeding them 3 times a day, making sure they were in air conditioned, some of them complaining. So that was a very expensive venture for us in the beginning. But we had increased activities at the airport, at all the different ports of entry. So as soon as our first case hit, we already had a isolation unit, or POC, or precautionary observation center set up. So we were taking the suspected case to those areas, and we were keeping the confirmed cases in the treatment unit. Everything was going okay. We're not saying it was perfect, but then the Delta variant hit. That was strange, because now we needed oxygen. And so we did not have any regular supply of oxygen, whether it was medical grade or we were getting it from outside, from companies. We had concentrators, we had oxygen tank, but then no oxygen. So one thing we learned from there is, as the COVID money came in, we are now purchasing 11 oxygen plants that will be located around the country. So just in case anything along that lines comes about again, then at least we'll lose less people or because of lack of oxygen. Now we had to manage other people that were not in the response, the other healthcare workers. So you have to think about that. Even though you are kind of compensating those who are in the response, but the rest of the healthcare worker will say, but patients will come to our facilities. So where's our hazard pay? So then the government had to look into resources to be able to at least give them compensation, because there were a lot of outcry from them. Also, you have to take in mind the women and the children. Children are out of school. What do you do with them? You have to protect them, because this is the time rape and other bad incidences happen. So we had to think about that, even though some of it had happened, but there was a multidisciplinary team led by the president to make sure that, we look into any cases that occur. We send messages. We have programs for the children. Then there was a survivor. Those who survived the COVID-19, they were coming back and say, look, we survived. There were other survivor network. What are you going to do for us? Or those who died, especially the healthcare workers. So luckily for us, World Bank had put in money aside for anyone that died, that was a healthcare worker that died, to be able to come out and say, my relative died, I need the compensation. So all of these things you have to think about. But overall, the preparedness is where we should be, whether within country or globally. Or within country, you have to make sure that you do an assessment of your country to see where you are. Are you at the level of red, yellow, or green? Those things that you are doing well in, you continue to leverage on it. Those things that you are not doing so well in, you need to make sure that you capitalize on them, make them better. Cross-border is very important. You have to be in touch with all of your neighbors, because you have to be able to call them, see what's happening, and see how you all can work together to make sure that patients who are crossing from country to country, you keep a track of it. And internationally, we also need to do that. We need to work together to strengthen, because a situation in one country, don't relax. People are on airplane, people are on trains, boats, and they will come to you. So we all should keep it together, working together to make the global community stronger. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Minister. And an absolutely multifaceted response, I think, needed, considering the community approaches, and considering ensuring that a family-oriented approach and at the community level, issues around information. And I think that is absolutely important. And I would like to sort of discuss how we can prepare cross-border, particularly when it comes to from one country to another. I think you mentioned cross-border issues. And with this, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmed Ogwal, who hopefully has managed to join virtually. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. So our virtual panelist could not manage Dr. Ahmed Ogwal, the Director General of Africa CDC. But I will then, before I come to an important aspect, which is looking at how do we actually get new preventative and new therapeutic measures. And before I come to you, Dr. Ruxandra Dragia, I would like to perhaps pass over to Sumya Swaminathan from the World Health Organization point of view, because the picture that we have seen that has been drawn for us from Uganda and from Liberia, from your experience at WHO, what are some of the key components of response as an organization that is leading recommendation and advice and policies for countries to respond, for Uganda right now to respond to Ebola, and experience from Liberia? What would you say some of the key things that we should be looking out for right now?
Maybe I'll stand, and it's easier for people to see and hear. So thank you very much for that question, John. And just following up on the observations we've heard from the ministers from Uganda and Liberia, as sitting at the WHO and really looking at the global picture and the global response, I'd like to perhaps make observations on three aspects. The first one, I think, has already been mentioned, and that is about investments in public health and primary health care. And what we observed is that countries that have had past experience of either outbreaks, epidemics, or infectious diseases in general, and had taken them seriously and invested, put resources into building some systems, actually did better. So we saw many African countries which have a good, community health-based network to address HIV, TB, Ebola, etc. But also countries in the East Asian region which had SARS and MERS, like South Korea, for example, after MERS, did a lot of things which helped them. So we see that from the government's response to the public's response and the way in which even a simple thing like mask wearing, we see it very different in different parts of the world. And so I think the first lesson is really investing in that primary healthcare and public health infrastructure, and the high-income countries that had very advanced care, clinical care in hospitals, but had over time not invested in public health, were unable to do the actions that were needed, the contact tracing, the outreach, the identification, and convincing people to quarantine and so on. The second aspect I want to touch on is around the research and the development and the deployment of countermeasures. And here again, we saw a lot of inequities. When we say the word inequity today, we mostly think of vaccine inequity, and it's true that it was very disturbing and in your face. But if you look at research resources, the GLOPID-R network, which is a network of research funders that funds infectious disease research, is maintaining a repository. And when you look at the amount invested, it's something like $5 billion from about 27 research funders around the world in literally thousands of projects. 95% of that went into high and upper middle income countries. The investments were made, less than 5% in low income countries. And when you don't participate in research, then you're also at the back of the queue, to receive the benefits of that research. And this is why the WHO set up the Solidarity Trial platform in order to engage as many countries as possible. We have over 50 countries participating in the Solidarity Trial. It was countries put in their own investments. It was done through a network of hospitals and doctors working in those hospitals. So there was no new infrastructure, and it was all simplified. Everything was a digital platform. It took you like less than 5 minutes to fill up the patient form at the time of enrollment and then at follow-up. So I think it was a very good model for how we can do research in the future on things that affect many countries and where we need globally representative data feeding into, because sometimes you have trials in one part of the world and then in other parts of the world, the regulators are not very happy to license those products. So talking about regulation, I think it's equally important to think about the innovations that happened during this pandemic, and also some lessons now for Ebola, for monkeypox and Lassa fever and all the other outbreaks we have. During COVID, I think again through necessity, regulators came together. They recognized it was going to be impossible for each regulator to have a look at the dossier and start approving products just because of the time and resources needed. So even really the large regulators, FDA, EMA, everyone agreed to work together. The WHO was part of this network, first of all agreeing on what the standards were going to be. So we came out with the target product profiles very early in 2020. This was following a lot of global consultations around the need for research, the need for developing these products. And it was the same for drugs and diagnostics, but that took a little bit longer. And for vaccines, all the major regulatory agencies agreed on the benchmarks very early on. So the assessment could be done properly. The one thing that could have happened better perhaps was head-to-head clinical trials, where we could have had multiple manufacturers agreeing to put their products into one platform trial so that you could actually have a comparative assessment. Today, there's a lot of debate, is this vaccine better, is that vaccine better? We really can't answer those questions because the endpoints and everything was differently designed for each trial. The assays were done differently, the endpoints were different. So ideally, again, in a system where you're trying to develop products very quickly, the private sector needs to also agree to certain sets of actions. And then the regulatory harmonization that happened, we have something called the collaborative registration procedure where countries rely on the WHO pre-qualification to license products. Now, normally we do something like maybe 50 to 100 registrations a year. In the last 2 years, we saw over 3,000 collaborative registration happening. And this can also improve access. So when we talk about access to health products, we must think about the end-to-end system, from investments in research through clinical trials, regulatory, and then the pricing, of course, and the affordability of those products. And then I would like to perhaps end by talking about another important, infodemics was mentioned, maybe we can come back to that later, but the evidence synthesis, the evidence evaluation, the use of that data and evidence for guidelines for policy making, this again varied from region to region, country to country. Some countries had very good scientific advice procedures and others didn't. And I think what we need to also recognize is that politicians don't make their decisions just based on data that's coming out of clinical trials or studies. There are many other social, economic, and other considerations. And so the evidence to policy, I think, is an area where we still need, in many countries, there's no good system of evaluation of that evidence, including the social science inputs, the economic, ethical considerations. We talked about lockdowns. Lockdowns had very different impact in different parts of the world. And there wasn't enough, I think, input and debate at the beginning about which kind of solutions or which kind of interventions are going to be appropriate for the context. And in poor countries, I think lockdowns did a lot more to damage livelihoods than perhaps COVID, and there could have been other measures. And similarly, school closures in many countries for over 2 years have done an incredible amount of damage, despite the fact there was no evidence that school closures were needed in order to prevent further COVID transmission, if you take all the other precautions. So I think these public health considerations where science is feeding into policy, and that interface, I think is an area where we need much more thinking and much more investments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan. I think quite an impressive array of issues that COVID-19 has caused cross-border. I think the impact that you just described over the last two years to everywhere, every section of the population, and some impact. Obviously, we have issues like long COVID that is still persistent as well. But with all that, I would like to welcome Dr. Dragia to talk to this panel a little bit about how Johnson & Johnson, as one of our champions, managed to get a working vaccine in record time. And I would be interested to hear what challenges you have seen in developing these countermeasures, but also some of the opportunities that you have also observed when it comes to working with the public sector, for example, the ministries that we have on this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you. And first, I would like to take a moment and recognize the extraordinary efforts that the colleagues in Uganda are actually taking to control this latest Ebola outbreak, the lessons learned from Liberia, and then obviously the leadership of WHO through the multiple challenges of the last few years, Ebola, monkeypox, COVID, all in the same time. And today, today's discussion couldn't be timelier because we must implement the lessons learned that we have already actually acquired all that information to prevent the outbreaks before they actually happen. And I do believe that the private sector plays a critical role in the outbreak response and preparedness, from how we manage our pipeline to supporting health systems, to turning vaccines into vaccinations and drug discovery into new treatments. So we must take a lab to last mile approach to tackling diseases of pandemic potential if we are to ever truly change the paradigm from reaction to pro-action. And I would like to focus on 3 lessons learned. I think that everyone had 3 lessons learned today. The first is actually around R&D investment. The development of multiple safe and effective vaccines and drugs for COVID-19 in such a short period of time was really a crowning achievement of modern medicine. Everyone thinks that it happened from a day to another, but in fact, it is built on more than 2 decades of medical research and innovation, including the mRNA vaccine, the adeno platform. All that had been studied for many, many decades in order to get where we were in our 100-day mission. We obviously need very strong support to continue these investments and to ensure that they bear fruit. So the entire ecosystem needs to be shaped such that it encourages innovation. So unpredictable funding, demand, market size do not favor nor encourage investment in novel pathogens and pandemic threats. On a more positive side, I would say we have excellent funding partners such as BARDA, CEPI, hopefully HERA in Europe, that could support the next wave of innovation and make it a reality. Making sure that adequate funding and address real needs of the community is really crucial to preventing the next outbreaks. I think that Sumia mentioned my second lesson, which is to accelerate access. When science delivers, we really must ensure that innovation reaches the communities where it is needed swiftly and equitably. So I must remind everyone that we've developed our 2-dose Ebola vaccine regimen in response to the 2014-2016 Ebola crisis in West Africa. We've initiated clinical trials on 3 continents, manufactured a stockpile of about 1.5 million vaccine regimens, and ultimately we secured an approval from the European Commission and the WHO pre-qualification. Our regimen is currently recommended for use by SAGE, both during outbreaks for individuals at some risk of Ebola and in an absence of an outbreak for those at the highest risk of exposure, so healthcare workers, frontline responders, and members of national or international response team. And we have seen that Ebola threat is not going away. The number, the frequency, the severity of outbreaks had clearly increased in recent years, including 2 outbreaks in 2022, plus a Marburg outbreak. So we really need to mobilize to do much more. And furthermore, the fact that the Ebola virus can linger in survivors for years, only to be reintroduced into communities later, highlights that we need to do much more to understand the diseases and then to really prepare for the future. My third point is actually around diversity in clinical trials. We really need to invest in ongoing research that is inclusive of the communities we seek to actually care for. The diversity in clinical research is really an imperative to ensure that our innovation are fit for purpose for the most of the communities, to strengthen the clinical research capabilities in resource-limited settings so that scaling up research is possible, and during outbreak, the infrastructure is ready for intervention and to save lives. So take, for instance, Rwanda. Our long-lasting collaboration with local partners like the Center for Family Health Research, as well as our international collaborators across the globe, such as the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, working on the Vaccine Confidence Project and in generated insights, helped us invest in local capacity development to effectively support the Rwandan Ministry of Health Umurunzi campaign, vaccinating adults at the border with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Further, this particular campaign leveraged Vaccinate, which is an integrated digital technology platform designed specifically for use in lower income settings. And that through collaboration with local implementers and clinicians. These investments, for instance, ensured that before COVID, we had an adherence rate for a 2-dose vaccination of almost 99%. And even during the COVID outbreak, the adherence was about 93%, which is a fantastic achievement. So this platform that was used as a demonstration in our Ebola vaccination campaign, we have partnered with the WHO for the solidarity trials. So it is really part of our Health for Humanity activities. So in short, it's time to truly implement the lessons learned. We've learned lots of lessons, and each outbreak of epidemic potential doesn't really require a new will to be created. We have learned a lot, and our goal now is to really take all those lessons learned and make sure that next time the community is responding faster and more adequately.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No new wheels. No new wheels. We have existing ones and absolutely fantastic lessons. And you have described so many opportunities for public-private partnerships, from lab to the last mile, and how R&D is an important and core part of epidemic control with new and existing pathogens. And we have Dr. Obinger with many stars in terms of research and capacity strengthening and training and global collaborations, particularly when it comes to the medical innovations and clinical trials fields in times of outbreaks. So I would be absolutely privileged to hear your take on Ebola and COVID-19 and what the panelists here have discussed, and whether there are any you see opportunities, particularly to strengthen R&D in low and middle income countries.
Thank you. I'm going to do this quick. It's hard to add more than all the great points that were made. Always a pleasure to be after Sumi and Ruxandra. I have less to say. But I'm going to add this. In addition to government, to private, to a lot of gears and parts that are moving into those preparedness and response. One thing is growing that I think is of high importance is the contribution from not-for-profit. We know it from the clinical side. Everybody knows Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, Lima now. The clinical side has been rolling on not-for-profit concept and environment for a long time. And now, especially for product that don't have an economic incentive, but have a very strong impact on public health. Ebola is one of them. CCHF, Nipah, you can go down the list of priority pathogen that has been established by the WHO. None of them have an economic strong incentive. But not-for-profit can create good job. It can create product, vaccine, therapeutics at less than 10% of the cost. And I know the numbers because we're doing it. And it can bring a lot of value together with the private industry. And there is more and more this. You see the collaboration between Merck and IAVI for different vaccine, IAVI being a not-for-profit, and there's others. So I think this is a resource that will grow. Also with something in mind that is very important is to give the product back to where the countries, where the raw materials have been taken. And I'll give you an example, monoclonal antibodies. Those PBMCs are from convalescent serum of people that survive infection in countries where those diseases are endemic. Those monoclonal, the IP of them and the monoclonal need to go back to the country. It's not for every country to produce their own monoclonal, but in the region, they can together work to produce those products. And I'll tell you what's great that is happening now is there is manufacturing that is growing at different locations of all the continent for vaccine, but also for therapeutics. And monoclonal antibody have a success rate of 20% for a product that enter clinical development. This is 4 times more than drug molecules. So it's a product that is well designed, that is working, that we see, that has still some challenges, that there is emergence of resistant strain. But look at right now, a lot of those products use only one monoclonal, and a lot of products that are coming in the future have different strategy, including just mixing monoclonal. But let's get back to the point here. The point is to use not-for-profit, cut the price down, the cost down, so that monoclonal therapy are not $2,000 to $10,000 per treatment. They go down to $20 to $200 per treatment maximum. And again, with those products, going back to the countries where they are being isolated from. And the more we do that, the more we'll have affordable solution, vaccine and therapeutics. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's really a good point to end this first segment of the panel on. And can I do a time check? Yeah. So we're now opening the session to the audience to ask questions to the panelists, and we have both audience here in person and also virtual questions coming in as well. So over to you, the audience. Okay, so we have a roving mic, I think. Could we start with a gentleman here in front, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Austin Demby. I'm the Minister of Health for Sierra Leone. I think this has been very exhilarating, very, very informative. I was in Uganda last week working with Minister Cheng in the situation in Uganda. And for me, the critical piece is Uganda, as our colleague mentioned, has had 7 outbreaks in the past, and I've been able to manage all of them very well. This outbreak may be a little different. In Sierra Leone, we had the horrible outbreak in 2014, 2016, and close to about 14,000 people were infected, and about 4,000 people died. We're still recovering from that. It turns out in Guinea, as in Liberia, where we had similar outbreaks, Guinea had another outbreak in February of 2021. And by June of 2021, that outbreak was contained. And for me, the lesson learned from that is speed, overwhelming force, and accuracy. What happened with the second outbreak was we didn't wait for just resources to come in. I think everybody put their hands together to support Guinea. We in Sierra Leone and our colleague in Liberia went over to Guinea and had solidarity. We made sure that all of what they needed, including the vaccines, were available to them. And all of the neighboring countries, we got 20,000 doses of the J&J vaccine for our frontline healthcare workers. We were determined to not let this outbreak spill over. We were able to fight the outbreak where it occurred. I think having the outbreak in remote areas is very, very different from having it in an urban environment. And I think what we're beginning to see in Uganda is there may be an urban component to this, and it requires slightly different, not slightly, a very, very different approach. It's a lot more aggressive. It's a lot more working with local communities within the urban environment where you cannot work on generalities. It has to be specific where you're having transmission occur. And for me, the one big lesson I'll share with everybody is the fact that, Roxandra, you mentioned latency. Latency is a real problem for us. You know, when you have people having infected, being able to shed virus 2 or 3 years later on makes us know that you don't actually have epidemics anymore. You probably have endemic situation with this, and we need to have that reality checked and make sure that we're responding as if this is happening now, because it's just an index of time before that latency translates into an actual outbreak. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Absolutely privileged to have you in the audience, and other ministers as well who might be present, and really an incredible message here on the speed, all hands on deck, and obviously contexts playing a big role here as well. So over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Let me join colleagues in thanking the panelists. Just 2 questions, one to our colleagues, ministers from the affected countries. What has been your experience as the best practice for media engagement? How early, how close, how quick would their own role be? And the second one is to a senior colleague from the WHO, whether WHO is thinking moving forward if we need to work with media practitioners in designing a framework of engaging the media and defining a role. We cannot run out of this info endemic issue, but I think some media framework engagement for the ministries of health during epidemic and pandemic might be helpful moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I will.
She insists I introduce myself.
Yes.
My name is Dr. Gidado Mustafa. I'm the Executive Director of KNCV Tuberculosis Foundation in the Netherlands.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I will probably start with you, Minister Jala, and media engagement, please.
Well, on media engagement, you have to be able to manage the negative as well as the positive news. So you have to have government media or authorities on board. You have to work with private media authorities. You have to work with county. You have to be able to translate all of the information into your local dialects or languages. So if you don't manage the media can break or make a response. So therefore, you really have to hold them. You have to see the popular ones. People don't listen to all of them, but those media stations that have loud mouth that can really get across to the people, make sure they are on your team. Have your, engage them, support them, because they're always looking for support. So you have to support them throughout the epidemic, or even after, to keep them engaged.
Thank you. And before I come to you, Sumia, I would like Dr. Dembe, Minister Dembe, to come in as well on that, just quickly on the Sierra Leone experience on media.
I think it's really important around communications. I think it's really important when dealing with communication that you have an active engagement of the audience you're working for and working with. For me, this is the best example of a capital P in public health, because the public has to understand that they are a part of the solution and their voice is being heard. What we had in Sierra Leone was an opportunity to do real small surveys in every community to find out what their concerns were, what their needs were, what is their role, they think, in the solution provision. And if you convert all of that into messaging, you find out that the people feel that we've been heard, we're part of the solution, are much more willing to participate. I think it's very, very difficult in this new world order of social media to compete. But what you want is to have a situation where people have a reliable source of information. And that reliability, that trust, is not built during the epidemic. It has to be built before the epidemic, where you see that, okay, if it's coming, what we heard in Sierra Leone was that if the message is coming from a healthcare worker on the radio, they trust it more than anything else. So it's helping to build that situation where the audience, the population you're serving, feel that they are part of this and their voice is being heard. And the only way you know that is not by your opinion, it's by asking them. Asking them, they have the answers. We were able to increase the safe medical burial from less than 20% to close to 100% by listening to the audience, because they said, first, we don't want you bringing that funny plastic bag here to put our loved ones in, because we associate the bags with trash. You're not going to put our loved ones in there. Secondly, we're very, very religious. We're not going to bury our dead without ceremony. So the compromise was to create a coffin or to create a shroud where the bag is hidden in the coffin in the trash, and you have a priest or an imam walk there and stay 10 meters away, but actively participate so everybody sees what's going on. So their voice is being heard. They feel that they're part of the solution. And that way you work together between the providers and the audience you serve to come to a common good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. And quickly, over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Yes, thank you. I think that was such an excellent example of the importance of responding to the community needs and to know what people are discussing and topics. So at the WHO, we've set up something called social listening. And I think it was in response to the fact that perhaps this was the first pandemic happening in the social media age, where a lot of people were getting their information not from mainstream media, but from social media, particularly local WhatsApp groups, Facebook chat groups, and so on. And so I think as public health practitioners, whether it's WHO or public health agencies, the ministries of health, we also have to adapt and change. And one of the things we have set up is, as I said, social listening, so that we are monitoring all the time what topics are going around in the chat, and particularly around vaccine misinformation, just as an example. So many misconceptions. which actually need to be addressed, and fears that people have, maybe genuine fears, but they need to be dispelled. The second is that I think it was an excellent question you had about the role of media. And I think the media really can play a very important role in crisis time. And I saw that there was a lot of excellent science journalism that was able to speak to people in their language, but which conveyed the scientific facts that were being discovered. And I think we have to build science journalism as a field. And there are many countries where this is still relatively weak. And I think the third thing is that as scientists, we have to also be able to communicate better. One of the findings from the pandemic is that in countries that had good governance, high levels of trust in government, actually the mortality was lower in those countries because people went along with what the government was telling them to do. And so I think, of course, this cannot happen overnight, but I think building the trust between people, as well as between people and government, is something that will serve us well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few questions, a few hands. And so what I will do is I'll start with the gentleman. Is there no women asking questions? Oh, here. Okay, excellent. So I will start with the lady over there, but I would like if you can introduce yourself and then ask your question and specify which panelist you're asking the question, and then I will collect a round of questions and then invite the panelists to come in. Thank you.
We'll give them numbers, maybe.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. The lady in the back. Oh, yeah.
My name is Umulisa Marie Michel from Rwanda, and I was happy to hear about Umulinzi because the Rinda Uzima, the organization I'm working with, we do clinical trials, but in this time we were doing community engagement. We were tasked by Ministry of Health to recruit 200,000 participants. But what I want to say here, that even before J&J came with this donation, when the government heard about outbreak in the DRC, they started straight away to prepare themselves so that they prevent as much as they can the outbreak in Rwanda. So when J&J came, it was easier for us because infrastructure was there. So what also I want to comment about engaging media, that was our strength. Media did a lot, helped a lot in recruiting and retentions of those participants to come for second dose, which was not easy during the outbreak of COVID-19. So engaging community is something that I would encourage everyone because I saw their strength. But what we need to put in our mind is that when media do not have information, where they're not trained about the pandemic, it would be a catastrophe because they may go out with the informations that are not correct, which it's not easy to bring back from the communities. So in our Ministry of Health, they have a department of communication where all messaging, they need to first check if the messaging going to the community is correct. So we worked with the media, national TV, and also community radio. So my message here was really to engage community, but make sure we are engaging community with the skills and the knowledge about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think Roxandra will come in at the end on that one. And the gentleman over there, and then the lady in the pink mask, orange mask. Okay. The gentleman.
Morning.
So if you can make your questions brief, because we have under.
My question will be brief.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
I'm Professor Beni. I come from Côte d'Ivoire, nearby Liberia. And my question is for Uganda. We encourage Uganda for the riposte, but I want to know what about the monitoring of the contacts? The contact, but that's the problem. Like in Ebola and so on, if the contact is correct, if you have a good strategies to interrupt the transmission of the Ebola through contact monitoring, we can stop the epidemic. And what about it? What is the first question? The second question is about the simulation exercise. Do you have a lot of simulation exercise before the epidemic?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Wayangera is going to come in at the end. The gentleman in front, here in front. I think two more questions, and then we'll turn to the panelists. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So my name is Dr. Sandeep Mishra. I am in NIMS University, Rajasthan, Jaipur. And my question is to Dr. Soumya. And I'm glad His Excellency raised this very important point that, the end people who are affected, how do their voices reach organizations like WHO? And so our university being one of the largest centers of isolating, quarantining, and even treating COVID people. But my question is very simple. How do we participate in WHO programs, particularly in the trial you just discussed? So is there a possibility where we can, be involved with WHO as a university, as, local leaders and, so that is my question. Thanks.
Okay. And the lady in the middle there, and then the gentleman, and then we turn back to the panelists, please.
Hi there. My name is Annette Mon. I work for Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, which was started by MSF and some other founding partners in endemic countries. My question is regarding research and development and for pandemic preparedness and response. Because as we know, and I think Soumya mentioned that, a lot of the research, a solidarity trial is an exception, and we are running an anti-COV trial, but it's often focused on high-income countries or upper-middle-income countries. And my question is, how can we ensure moving forward that research for pandemic response is also addressing low and middle-income country needs? Because without the infrastructure there to support that, it may not be possible. So I think we have to think ahead of time. And either Soumya or maybe Dr. Kobinger could respond.
Thank you very much. Last question. Here.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Tristan Leroyd. I work for Emergent, but this question's more of a personal question. It's nothing to do with the company I work for. It's about non-profits, and it's about how companies are funded, and then also it's about the really large profits that were taken out of COVID-19 situation. And then in terms of the global context of neoliberalism, and then this growing inequality. So I'd just like to hear some ideas on how we can reform the pharmaceutical space so that it involves more cooperatism with those individuals who are further down the scale and who are losing out in the wider geopolitical and economic context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So back to the panelists then. I think quick fire answers under 1 minute, I think, because we don't have long remaining, and we'll have a closing remarks as well. So over to you, Dr. Wayangera, and then to Minister Jala, and then come anti-clockwise, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And frankly, I think I want to respond specifically, but Chair, I need one more minute to speak about many things that we are doing differently, and I think that we need to learn from. And thank you, Minister, for speaking about the regional meeting we just held. Very key, important in terms of making sure that we develop a policy framework for regional and, of course, international health security. One of the other thing, of course, to talk about is the fact that Uganda, learning from COVID, has been able to develop a framework for adaptable clinical trials. And that has enabled us to rapidly try therapeutics and an ongoing solidarity trial with WHO for the Sabine vaccine, and possibly moving on to the Chad Oxford vaccine as well for the Sudan virus is in preparation. That vaccination should probably start next week. So that information is key, that we've worked so rapidly. Actually, of the many health workers that got exposed, we were able to save several, and largely because we were able to rapidly deploy remdesivir in combination with monoclonal antibodies. So that information is important. Yes, we are back to the question. We're doing quite a lot of work in terms of course, contextually, it's very difficult, but risk communication is a key part of the response to Ebola. Risk communication and community engagement, key part of the Ebola response. And frankly speaking, it's the only way we can streamline. The media is a partner, but every time you need to be able to give them the right information when they want the information. So that pillar is well structured in our context, and it deals with including monitoring for rumors and misinformation. But of course, a lot sieves through, and a lot needs to be done to think around what solutions we need to get to solve that. But back to the question of contact tracing. Contact tracing, of course, is a very key thing. I think by the time we had listed over 1,500 contacts from this outbreak. The cases we have so far, 60 cases, 24 dead, and 24 discharged. So the case fatality, you would list it close to 50, but we have 11 patients on the ward still. But out of all this, we had listed over 1,500. Actually, the secondary cases we are experiencing in the urban areas were already on the contacts. The issue now comes from the strategy for isolation, because we trusted these people with the idea that, okay, you talk to people, they stay at home, they know that they have been contacts, they isolate themselves. We are finding ourselves moving to institutional quarantine to isolate people, because at the same time, we realize that probably we are dealing with a difficult community, and we need to, for some of the difficult contacts who cannot isolate at home, we have to move. You realize that's an expensive endeavor. It's very difficult to effectively do, and that's why I think the president yesterday came out to announce a regional lockdown of the heavily affected districts, partly to enable this take place. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to you, Minister Jala.
Okay, I just wanted to mention something about risk communication in the social media. Because people have the opportunity to go and read everything on what's happening, a lot of people died during the Delta variant because they were reading this information, COVID not real, and or the government were making it up because they wanted more money and all of that. So all those middle age individuals from different offices, they were not from the communities. These were people in the urban area who were deputy ministers, and they were different jobs. And because they did not believe once they got the COVID, and we told them, you can't go to work, they went to work, they spread it to their friends, and a lot of the people in that cycle died. So lesson learned for that whole group, you can't follow everything that's on social media. You should listen to the right report. Somebody asked about simulation exercises. Well, in Liberia, right, we did simulation. Ebola, we were not prepared for COVID at the time, but we did simulation around Ebola every so often to see the response of the community, to see the response of the entire system. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you pass because of IPC measures. So we know that you healthcare workers forget that you need to apply IPC measures to every case. And once you forget whether it's a disease that you touch or not, a disaster can happen for the healthcare workers. So you have to constantly train your healthcare workers. On the line of research and development, we have research for Ebola, and they started research on COVID vaccinated individuals. But I think as the world developed, I think a lot of the research should turn to the African continent and build the skills of the individuals here. So we already started making our own vaccines. We need to produce our own drugs, because it's easier when disaster happens while other people are mobilizing. You can mobilize at home.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Yes, I'll just quickly touch on some of the issues, very important ones brought up by the audience. I think the first one on research and development, as well as on manufacturing. This is why we've started the mRNA technology transfer program, and that hopefully will start covering other technologies. The idea really is to democratize the access to knowledge, to new data, to evidence. And I think there is now a global community, even though the big pharma may not play a part in this, but we have seen that there's enough commitment from scientists around the world to work together. And in the future, we must have regional capacity so that no region is dependent and waiting for other parts of the world to do the research, to make the product, and then to transfer it. I think we have to build that self-sufficiency and resilience, not at the country by country level, but at the regional level at least. And I think the Africa Union, Africa CDC have played a really very impressive role in advancing this, along with partners like WHO and so on. There was a question around the role of private sector. The private sector has a very important role to play, clearly. No product can be scaled without the private sector. But again, we need to address the issue of equity. And when there is a lot of investment into products from governments, from using taxpayer and public funding, then I think there is a responsibility to also make sure that those products are accessible. And so we need to really start thinking about putting in place wording, language into contracts when large government grants are made to develop products. I mean, it's estimated $100 billion were invested for COVID drugs and vaccines, mostly from government funds. And so I think then there is a responsibility and accountability of the private sector to make sure these, and some of the companies really did that very well and others did not. And finally, I think on the role of WHO and how can people in countries participate, I think again, WHO is an agency that basically is made up of its experts and people from member states. So the Secretariat only acts as a mechanism to bring these global networks together. And in fact, we have thousands of scientists working just on COVID issues right from day one, and they still continue. But I think the key to participating in research, for example, is in advance of the pandemic to have those infrastructures ready. We work through national agencies, we work through the ICMR, for example, in India, or other health research bodies in different countries, and different agencies were able to quickly come on board or not, depending on how strong they already were, how their ethics review has been already established, how the regulatory reviews have already. So all of these aspects need to be strengthened before we can actually come together very quickly at the time of an emergency. So again, it's a plea to national governments to also invest in research capacity and not wait, till there is an emergency.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And apologies, I wish we had more time. It's absolutely fantastic. Over to you, Dr. Dragia, and then final word, Dr. Cobbinger, and then we go into the closing ceremony.
Yeah, thank you. A few answers to the questions. About Umurunzi, the vaccination monitoring platform, in fact, entails a part of mobile technology where we are actually gathering the insights from the community, and that it transfers into messages to the participants in the trial that are informing them everything from where to come for their next vaccination to combating some of the misinformation that is actually found in the community. And that was the basis of the adherence rates, the 93 to 99% adherence rates. On a completely different subject, which is the R&D, I'd like to say that, for instance, in our global public health model in Johnson & Johnson, we are innovating specifically for low-income countries. And we have this lab to last mile that addresses diseases such as TB, leprosy, corona therapeutics, dengue. So we are really in that particular therapeutic area directly innovating to address the needs of the community. And the model is really based on collaboration and partnership with the countries, with developing capacity in those countries, and then working with non-for-profits, with international organizations to really see that those products can arrive to the populations that need them the most.
Thank you very much. Dr. Cobbinger?
If I remember both questions, but one was how to maybe promote the use of not-for-profit. It's really, I think, to partnership with them. And so I'll give you an example of what not-for-profit has done for COVID in Canada. Not-for-profit that I created in 2018 was doing 50,000 COVID tests at $18 to $34 maximum per test. That's when people were paying $120 to $240 per test at the airport, for example. That's when the federal Canadian government gave contract of over $100 million to for-profit company to do the same test. Again, at the cost way over. And why? Why would you go pay 5 times, 6 times, 10 times the price? Well, I think it's just starting. Too few still. By the way, you can check out gardarx.org. We also help, if somebody wants to create a not-for-profit, we'll help them. We'll tell them what to do and how to do it. We can even advance the money for them to create that not-for-profit. And I will add, it's a responsibility also to scientists that are doing research to explore the possibility to do that, to create a not-for-profit and create a discovery in that not-for-profit so that the IP can be managed, can be given away, the product can be. So this is done with Alima right now. We're exploring, our goal is to actually go to Sierra Leone with their permission, Liberia, Guinea, and Nigeria, and we'll flood the market with monoclonal antibody against Lassa. But these will be monoclonals that will be yours, not ours. So with your permission and help, we'll go there, isolate monoclonals with the not-for-profit and give them back to you and show you how we would advance it and how we would produce them in CGMP quality. And again, this needs to continue to be in partnership with the for-profit companies that have a different level of technology and advancement. And again, together with government, together with WHO, we can bring costs down of healthcare and be sure that country have more say, more autonomy, and more access to tools, basically, and life-saving drugs and vaccine.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, I wish we had more time, but alas. So I will welcome Dr. Wolfram Morgenroth-Klein, who is the head of pandemic preparedness in the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, but also with expertise in making disease control policies and practice in the low and middle income countries. Over to you, Dr. Morgan Rothklein.
Yes, thank you. First of all, please let me say on behalf of the German government that we are sorry and concerned that Mr. Amit Okwil is not here with us today because of problems that arose at Frankfurt Airport these days. And like Dr. Tedros rightly communicated, every person should be treated with respect when entering a country. Mr. Okwil, and of course the organization he represents, African CDC, is a much respected and needed partner in global health cooperation. And that is why I really feel sorry. We would have needed Mr. Okwil here to discuss it with us today. And thank you to all the panelists for sharing their very valuable experience with us. I've learned a lot today, and I would only have 4 main takeouts for me personally. I'm sure it's only a very minor part of what can be taken out, and 2 final comments. The first is when a pandemic outbreak occurs, we need to be speedy, massive and accurate, as some of the participants has pointed out, and we need to be speedy, accurate and massive at the country and the community level. The second, the equitable access to vaccines, but not only to vaccines, also to therapeutics and diagnostics is key, and that is huge work of discussion, dialogue with the private sector, with state actors, with all the actors in the health sector. Third, cooperation of these actors and communication in the social arena is key, as there are so many wrong and so many hasty informations around, and that is why it's so important to involve with communities in order to know what is needed, and also to have reliable government and non-government platforms for information and exchange of information. And fourth and last of my takeouts is that we still need to learn much more, and we also need to organize that process of learning. So which are the public health lessons learned we really can take out of these last 2 years? What were the decisions that were correct? Are these decisions correct in each and every context and country? And how do we move forward for the future outbreaks? And in that regard, I think congratulations to the first reactions to the upcoming Ebola infectious outbreaks in Uganda. It is clearly to be seen that Uganda and the region has lessons learned, and that it is applying lessons learned. However, the situation is still serious, and be assured that the world community will stand with you in dealing with it. My last 2 comments are with regard first to funding. As somebody from the Foreign Development Cooperation Ministry, of course, we are among those actors that are trying to organize with many others on how to better prepare. And here one of the new institutions or the new funds that are being created right now is the Financial Intermediate Fund for Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response at the World Bank, with strong participation from WHO. One of the main objectives of this upcoming fund will be to finance calls for proposals that come out of the countries, that come out of the regions and the institutions involved, in order to build up on the learning processes and to really make a difference in global preparedness, but not only preparedness, also prevention, and also a fast response to infectious outbreaks. Last comment, what do I wish for the future? In my opinion, women are essential for the health sector, and the health sector has the biggest potential for a successful feminist development policy, as we like to call it in my ministry. Women are the main carrier of knowledge and know-how in treating diseases, and they are the main workforce in hospitals. They are at the same time more likely to be more exposed to hazards and diseases associated with with drinking water, wastewater, because of gendered roles, being that they are often considered to be in charge of household chores, such as doing the dishes and cooking. Therefore, the health sector will tremendously benefit from a gender equal society, and that is one thing we believe is central also for dealing with the ongoing pandemic and future pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan Klein. And this will mark the end of this conversation. We absolutely have been enjoying this conversation here, and it can continue also outside tomorrow and in the coming days. Issues that were raised here, lessons that were shared here are central to IDRC. As a government funder in low and middle income countries, we absolutely welcome innovations to address inequality, increase collaboration, high and low income countries. Therefore, it has been an absolute privilege to hear all of you discussing your experiences today. Thank you.